Part 2, what is CGI and creating HTML forms. So CGI is the Common Gateway Interface. It's a standard method for a web server to interact with external programs. It can be implemented in any programming language, and scripts, for example in Python or a language like Perl, written to interact with a web server are often called CGI scripts, but you could write them in C or C++ or Java or whatever. The script's standard output, so in other words what would normally go to the screen, gets returned by the web server to a web browser. Now this is a very simple example of a CGI script, and it contains two parts. The first part is this content type line that basically says that the output is HTML, and then we're just printing some text, and it's HTML text that we're printing. So all we're doing is printing something, and we'll return to this in more detail later. Historically, CGI scripts were generally written in Perl, and the first standardized way of handling CGI information within these scripts was to use a Perl module, which is just like a Python module, called CGI.pm. And that was actually written by a bioinformatician by the name of Lincoln Stein. So there really has been quite a tight link between the development of the web and the development of bioinformatics. Now the Python equivalent to using that CGI.pm Perl module is to say import CGI in Python. And this makes it really very easy to interact with the web server and with the information that comes from the web browser. So we're going to have a look at the browser side of things, in other words the HTML that's needed in order to create web forms where you can enter data and send it to a CGI script that's running on the web server. The key thing that you need is this form tag, and that's followed by a method and an action. And the action is the CGI script that we're going to run. Now here we're just printing some information in a paragraph, and here's another example of one of the special things that we have within a form, which is a text area. So that's a box which is 20 rows by 80 columns, and that's where you might enter some sequence information. And then we have a submit button, and this is in a tag of type input, and a reset button to clear the form. So just to go through this then, the first bit, the method, is how data are sent to the server. Now there are two ways of doing that, and we'll come back to those in just a moment. The next part is the action. That's the CGI script that's going to be run on the server. And then we have our buttons and text boxes. And this would be the sort of form that we would get if we did that. So a paragraph saying enter your sequences in FASTA format, a text area for entering the information, and then buttons saying submit sequences and clear form. So the action specifies the location of the CGI script. Now normally that will reside on the same machine as the web page, so we don't need an http:// whatever. We can just start from the top of the web accessible directories, though you can use a full URL as well. Often these scripts live in a special directory called CGI bin or something like that, but they don't have to. Things can be set up such that the CGI scripts live in the same directories as the HTML web pages. And for creating pages and CGI scripts at Birkbeck, there will be a set of special instructions as to where these live. Now, I said that there were different methods of sending data to the web server. So there's method equals get and there's method equals post. So get is used where there are small amounts of data to be sent, and the data are actually sent as part of the URL. So you may well have seen long, complicated URLs which have a starting section, then a question mark, and then sets of keys and data. So key equals data, ampersand, key equals data, ampersand, and so on. So when you use a form with a method of get, the data that are sent from the form get appended to this URL in this sort of format. Post, on the other hand, is used where large amounts of data need to be sent. And in this case, the data are sent separately from the URL. So there's a separate connection process to send the data over to the server. So I'm going to go through the most important form elements. You've seen a few of them already. Let's look at them in a little bit more detail. The first type of form element is the input tag. Now this is a self-closing tag, so it ends with /greater than. There is no end input needed. Now there are lots of variations on the input tag, but two of the kind of fundamental ones are the type submit and the type reset. And those are used for submitting a form and for resetting it, clearing all the boxes and setting everything back to their default values. The value equals part is used to specify the text that should appear on the buttons. The second type that we've seen already is the text area. So in this case, this is not a self-closing tag. We have a text area and an end text area. And anything that appears between those opening and closing tags will appear as the default within the text area box. So this is designed as a large multi-row box for entering relatively large amounts of text. The rows equal and cols equals attributes specify the size of the box, and the name equals gives this set of data a name which can then be used within the CGI script to extract those data. The next element is a checkbox. This again is part of the input type, and this creates a tick box like this, and again we have a name, so this will be used to access whatever was clicked or not clicked in the CGI script, and we have a value as well. So if the checkbox is checked, then this we can think of this effectively as a variable in the CGI script. That variable will be set to this value. If we want a tick box to be ticked already, so the default is that is ticked, then we can add checked equals 1 into the attributes. Radio buttons are similar, but they're mutually exclusive. So in this case, we create each radio button by using again an input tag. We say type equals radio, and name equals whatever we want to call it, and value equals whatever the value is. Now all the buttons that have the same name will be mutually exclusive. And again, if you think of the name as being like a variable name, the CGI script will see this variable name set to whichever value corresponds to the button that was clicked. Again, we can use checked equals 1 to pre-tick a particular option. We've already seen the text area for large amounts of text, but for small amounts of text like an identifier for a particular sequence or a person's name or something like that, we can use again an input This time it's of type text. We give it a name as we did before. We can give a default value, and we can say a size, so that's going to be a width, and also a maximum length, which is the maximum number of characters that can be entered into the box. All of these attributes, other than the type equals text, obviously to specify that this is a text box, and the name are optional. We can also create pull-down menus, so that's done using a select tag. And again, we use name equals to specify effectively a variable name that can be accessed within the CGI script. We have a size. Now, with a size equals 1, that gives us a pull-down menu as we have here. If we have size greater than 1, it gives us a scrolling list like this. After the opening select tag, we give the options that can be entered, and these are appearing in this pull-down menu. And finally, we have a close select tag. If we set the attribute multiple equals 1, it allows us to click multiple options at the same time, which you would do by holding down the control button while clicking on the different menu items. Now again, what will happen is that in the CGI script it will be able to see this kind of variable with the name here of foo, and then that will be set to one of these. There are various other form elements available, and they all support several other attributes, but for today we're just going to use those basic key ones, and you can find out about the others as you need them. In the third part of the lecture, we will look at how you actually create the CGI script that's going to deal with these pieces of data that have come from the web form.